I was watching Pat's content because he's one of the only guys that I learned early on actually understood China. I'm like, yeah, everything he's talking about is right. Why is nobody else picking this up?
What do you mean by understood China?
We can rah about, oh, we're good, they're bad. Okay, look, there's a dispute with Taiwan and China, and if I'm a Chinese guy, I'm going to say, dude, that's a part of our thing. It's like, people who complain about Tibet, it's like, bro, they lost, okay? Like, have a revolution or shut up.
Right.
Like,
So how do you take the UFC to China and not have to, like, at some point, have to work with them?
So, again, I went to China because of martial arts the first time, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this is like where martial arts come from. This is a natural bridge. And, I knew the Chinese fighters because I had met some of the local promotion guys. About a month later, I got an email saying, hey, can you fly to Vegas? I walk in, there's like 15 people in this meeting. Like Lorenzo, Dana pops in for a minute. Like all these.
You're thinking you're going to meet a couple guys.
Yeah, and my computer dies right at the beginning, so I have to it blue screens, so I have to reboot it. Anyway, I just put it down, and while I was rebooting, I just. Whoa, baby.
Welcome to Grit. Today is a really special episode for me. We get to interview a good friend of mine. Just a little bit about this person. His resume is just incredible. 20 years in Asia, including 15 in China, 5 in Thailand, speaks 5 languages, Mandarin, Portuguese, Thai, Japanese, and English. Also lived and worked for 3 years in Brazil in media and sales and VT, Valuetainment, where we actually met. He worked for companies such as Endeavor, IMG, the NFL, and the UFC. Was solely responsible for bringing the UFC into China, responsible for tens of millions of dollars in media sales across 3 continents, and built an entire infrastructure and sponsorship ecosystem for Valuetainment. And most recently opened Crown Sponsor almost a year ago, and is currently with some big names such as Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Jack Carr, and now Matt Gaetz. Ladies and gentlemen, my friend Aaron Randolph. How you doing, dude?
I'm doing good, man. How you guys doing?
What's going on, Aaron?
Nice to meet you. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too, man. So just to give the audience a little bit of background on how we met, you came to Valuetainment. I had been Valuetainment by that time for like 2 years, I think.
Yeah.
And I was managing production, and then you came over and started doing sponsors. And I remember I was in my cubicle and in my corner, and you came and wanted to move right next to me, and you're like, "Hey, bro, I'm gonna help you. We're gonna make so much money, dude." And I was like, "Who is this guy?" I literally just met him, and he wants to help me, and he wants to help us make money. And fast forward, a year later, I left, and then I think you left maybe a year or 6 months after that.
Yeah.
And, I started the media agency, you started the sponsorship agency, and we kind of started, tag teaming different, projects such as Jack Carr, Andrew Bustamante, Matt Gaetz. And it's been incredible, man. But the reason I wanted to have you on was I'm super interested to see the whole story, the from the very beginning. I mean, the unlikely, you're half white, half Japanese, grew up in Brazil. And then you get sucked into all these awesome things. And people might say, like, how does that happen? So can you kind of walk us through from the very beginning, like from Aaron, like nobody that nobody knows, to like all of a sudden you maybe met somebody, and then that led to one thing and another and another?
Yeah, well, first let me say I didn't grow up in Brazil.
Okay.
I grew up in Tacoma, Washington.
So how old were you when you went to Brazil?
I was actually, when I started at Valuetainment, this is the funny part, because we were talking, because I would just show up on emails with people and text messages from Brazil at Valuetainment saying, hey, I need to help with sponsorship. And you guys are like, who is this guy? Then I'd show up in the office like once every month. I actually lived in Brazil up until 2023. So I was there for 3 years. And I'll walk through that a little bit. But I actually grew up in a small, like not rural, but like semi-rural town in Washington State called Puyallup, Washington.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, nobody has. In fact, people from credit card companies would call and you're like, are you from Puyallup, Washington, where famous for a fair, and that's all we have. Grew up in a real redneck, poor, upbringing. My dad was a logger for Weyerhaeuser, the company. He was a truck driver for the first part of my life. And then when I was probably 10 or 11 years old, we kind of went through this really hard time financially and ended up moving into like this ghetto neighborhood in Tacoma, Washington, where my first week, my bike got stolen. I got in 3 fights and got beat up and like had to like really kind of change my whole focus, from just being a normal kid hanging out with kids that I grew up with to like trying to survive a little bit. But yeah, it was, I made it all the way through until about high school in Washington. And then I started getting in trouble about my sophomore or junior year. One of my friends had this really great idea that we should go break into cars and rob people, and not rob them physically, but rob their stuff from them. And so I went to jail a few times in high school, which kind of made me a minor celebrity. And then I dropped out my junior year. And when that happened, I right after my senior year of high school, which I should have graduated, I actually dropped out.
Why'd you drop out?
I just couldn't. I left home at 15, and so I was living with friends and family off and on for those 2 years. And then it was actually my senior year of high school, my last semester, I dropped out, and then I got saved. I was at this Bally Total Fitness. I was a lifeguard too while I was after high school. And
let's talk about that. What made you go from like robbing people, going to jail, and all of a sudden say, you know what, this church thing seems like it's for me?
I mean, I had a Paul type conversion where I was talking to this woman about a girlfriend, and she said, "Oh, you need to like think about Jesus." And there's another part of that is that I actually grew up in a cult church.
A cult church?
Yeah. So I was with the...
As a kid?
Yeah. So
what made it a cult church? Like what?
Have you ever heard of Herbert W. Armstrong?
I have.
Yeah. So I was with the Herbert W. Armstrong Worldwide Church of God. And so we kept the Sabbath, all the kosher laws, dietary laws, all the Jewish festivals. So I actually like make fun of Jewish people because I'm more Jewish than you are. Like, I keep the high days and eat kosher, which I don't anymore. But because of that, I kind of had an off taste for religion. I had a rough, and my dad and I never really got along. I'll leave it at that. So I left home at 15, and then, at my senior year, I just kind of dropped out. And then it was right after that I missed it by 1 credit to graduate high school. And then I was lifeguarding at Bally Total Fitness one day, and this woman goes, I was talking to her about girls, and she said, Jesus, da da da. I was like, lady, I don't want to hear this. And then I heard this voice go, "This is the truth, and you need to follow me." And I went, "Lady, whatever you're saying, I believe you, and I want to pray." And
Hold on, what did that moment feel like?
It was like, how they talk about when Christ talks about, or after Christ was resurrected, or the veil fell from the temple. It felt like that. It felt like everything that was blocking me, that was in the way of that, was just fell away.
So you felt like you just had an immediate clarity.
I knew. It's one of those things like
certainty.
When I just knew, and that's why I didn't understand anything. And so I was like, lady, whatever you're saying, I believe you. Let's pray. And that didn't turn everything around immediately. I was still a knucklehead, obviously, and still getting in trouble. But then I went back to my high school, and I found out my principal paid for a class from one of the universities so that I could finish high school. Like, he paid for it. It was like $500. I didn't have any money at that time. And this is in the 90s too. So, and so I got my high school diploma, and then I went to this Christian camp in Southern California in San Bernardino called Forrest Home Christian Conference. And that's where things radically changed. I remember we were singing "Created Me a Clean Heart, Oh God," this one day, and I didn't cry for 3 or 4 years. I refused to cry, which is something I think Erick.
Was it a refuse to cry, or did you have the capacity to?
I refused. I just refused.
You thought it was weak?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and all of a sudden I started bawling. And the next thing I know, I was falling down, but I was a lifeguard at this camp, right? And all of a sudden, all of these people are holding me, and they're and singing around me, and I'm just weeping. And it was funny because I had left that summer. I was working as a lifeguard for a small city in Washington State. And I left and I was like, I'm gangster. I'm like, I'm still this. I came back and I'm like, it's all about Jesus. Jesus loves you. Da, 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 da.
Is that the church you were talking about? It was kind of cultish, or that was?
No, that was coming out. I never went back to that church.
Okay.
I actually became a non-denominational evangelical Protestant.
Gotcha.
So, and I was like, and it's funny because I went back the second summer, and my boss said, I really wanted to fire you last year when you left the first time. And I was like, hoping you wouldn't come back. Now I really hope you come back because this year has been such a change in you. And in that time too, I said, I want to go back to school. So I had just finished my...
Well, what changed about you?
I just felt like I needed to do... First of all, I didn't want to work construction. I learned that really young. I didn't want to be outside and be cold.
You were doing construction at that time?
When I was in high school, like I'd work construction sometimes and, and I just didn't, it just wasn't where I wanted to go.
Right.
And then I just I didn't like education either. But then when I got saved, kind of things started to change. So I had taken a year off and then I went to that camp. When I came back, I was like, while I was in the camp in California, I went to visit Biola University. And I just walked in and I was like, wow, I got to come here. And so I prayed with some people. I came back and I had a 1.9 GPA in high school. So,
been there.
So they weren't exactly open arms to Biola. They're like, go back to community college and then come back in a couple years. So that's what I did. I came back. I went to community college. And it's funny because at that time, so I worked at this camp and it paid like $225 a month, but it gave you like housing and food. Yeah. So I came back with no money, no place to live. And I had a car, but somebody had been in storage for the whole summer. And I was like, I'm going to be fine. I know that God's going to provide. Within a week, I had come back. I met one of my friends from high school who was just looking for a roommate and I could afford the rent. I got a check from Alcatel, from the telephone company, for like enough money to pay for everything to move in. And my job restarted and everything just kind of fell into place. And I was like, wow, God's real. Like, this is going to work. Like, there's a real thing here. And then I went from 1.9 to like 3.5 GPA in community college, became like the vice president of my community college.
Wow.
Like, I went to China on a study abroad from the community college.
That's the first time you went to China. Interesting.
Yeah. So I was the first student ever to go as a study abroad for them to there.
Wow. Did you know how to speak Mandarin by then?
No. So in high school, barely. And in community college, I studied Japanese actually, because my grandmother's Japanese. I'm a quarter Japanese.
Gotcha.
And I thought I was going to go to Japan. I was like, okay, I'll go to Japan. And then I did Chinese martial arts before I got into kickboxing and jiu-jitsu. And this teacher who was from China said, hey, you should go to China and study Chinese. And I was like, sure, I'll go. Why not? And I went, and I had another one of those moments, like when I got saved. I got off the train in Kowloon, and then I went across the border to Shenzhen. And as soon as I got off, I very clearly heard God say, this is where I want you. So I studied for 4 months, and it was Chinese, which in 4 months, you can't really, unless it's like an easier language, like you can't get very far in there. But for some reason, I came back and I called the professor who had asked me said I should go to China. And I spoke to him in Mandarin, and he's like, who is this? I'm like, it's me, it's Aaron. He goes, how is your Chinese so good after 4 months? And I'm like, is it? Because I didn't think it was good, right? And so then I knew that was kind of my path forward, was to finish college and then go to China. And it's funny because I was going to transfer to the University of Washington, but I got finished with almost everything on my associate's degree, but then they wanted me to do 2 more classes. And I was like, I don't want to go 2 more classes at the community college. I'm done with this. So I just randomly applied to Biola again, and I got in, and I got the scholarship to go. And I just jumped on I drove down like 3 weeks later and started my career at Biola, which...
A degree on what?
I have a degree in intercultural studies, which is kind of a parallel to international relations.
Okay.
But it's also for church planting. Not that I...
Really?
Yeah. And it's funny because I never wanted to be a missionary in the traditional sense, dude. Yeah. I don't want to live in a mud hut. Like, I want to live in an apartment and wear a suit sometimes. And so that's kind of like... And I actually did my graduate degree in that as well in Thailand, which we can talk about in a little bit. But it was kind of one of those things where I was like, well, this is the direction I'm going. And it's funny because, I knew that. Like, I knew I was supposed to go. And the only thing I think that could have ever derailed me would have been to like meet somebody that pulled me off the path, right? So my senior year of college at Biola, I was getting ready to graduate. And I was like, I'm going to go to China. And I met this girl, like in a not at Biola, because I took a couple classes outside because Biola was expensive. And this girl heard me speaking Chinese to somebody. She turned around, she's like, oh, you speak Chinese? And I started dating her, and like we got engaged. And then out of the blue, like one day she goes, you have to make a decision. You either have to marry me or you have to go to China. You can't do both. And I'm like, well, you'll be my wife. Like if you go with me and it doesn't work, then I'll know that that's not where I'm supposed to be, because after Christ, you're second, right?
Yeah.
And she's like, no, you have to make a decision. And we broke up, and I was just wiped out. Like it just broke my heart, because when I graduated college, the only person who came to my graduation besides my friends were her and that Chinese teacher from Tacoma, Washington, who flew down for my graduation, which is funny. And so I was kind of lost and didn't know what to do. And I ended up like getting back on a plane and going back to Washington. And I got to Washington and I'm like, what am I going to do now? Like I want to go to China, but now I don't know how. And so I started like lifeguarding again with the degree, and I'm like, this is not where I want to be. And it's funny because I went to go see that teacher, and I walked into his office and he goes, I have an opening at Beijing University to teach. Can you leave next week? And I was like, yeah, I don't have anything here. I can go.
Teach English?
Yeah, at Beijing University though. So like the next week I'm on a plane to Beijing to teach at Beijing University's actually.
What year is this?
This was 2002.
And you're about how old at this time?
26, 25, 26.
Was the U.S.-China relationship the way it is now, or?
No, it was better. We had the Belgrade issue in 1998, the bombing of the embassy, which caused some problems. And then we had the 2001 spy plane, which what I didn't mention is when I was in Biola, I actually went to study abroad again to China.
Okay.
And that's when the plane thing went on. And we were all kind of like, oh, what's going to happen to all of us? So yeah, it was, other than that though, the relations I think they were a lot better.
And was it like, because I know you've been to China years after that, and there's like surveillance, there's this weird stuff that happens. That first time you went, did you see any of that?
No, I mean, it's so crazy how far China's come in such a short period of time. When I first got there, they had skipped VHS and went right to VCD, which is like a ghetto DVD. And of course they had a good people network communication system. So like if your neighbors were all watching you and they would report back to the bureau, like what the foreigners doing in their building and stuff like that. But not like it was like, I went back in 2017 was the last time I was in China for a funeral. And the taxi driver told me they have that application called WeChat, right? Where you can communicate, pay all your bills. Like he goes, if I run the red light, they'll still facial recognition me or the car and take the money out of my account automatically. So it was like night and day. And so, yeah, it wasn't like that. Those were the golden years. 02 to like 2010 were probably the funnest. Like I walked in at the 08 Olympics. I just walked into every event. I just walked right by security and they were like, oh, he must be supposed to be here.
That's so funny. We were at the Mike Tyson, Jake Paul fight. Yeah. And I get this text. Aaron is like, yeah, dude, I'm at the VIP section. I'm like, how the hell did you get there? He's like, I just told him I belong there.
I noticed that's the one thing I've learned. If you walk with confidence and you can pretty much do almost anything. So
yeah, no, that's pretty fun. So I'm curious, dude, because one of the things that stands out to me is your ability to connect with people. And I think that relational skill is, I would say, attributes to your success and everything that you do in sales, sponsorships, all that kind of stuff. So is that something that you always had and you saw, you know what, I'm pretty good at, connecting with people and almost like persuading them to do what I want them to do and kind of open up to me?
I think that comes from survival to start. When I grew up, they used to call me Randolph the Bucktooth Reindeer. And I was like really skinny. And so I'd get picked on a lot. And so you kind of learn how to maneuver with like people who are stronger. You understand how to deal with them and you kind of get them on your side. Yeah. I think that's where that comes from.
Interesting.
And there was a moment I remember when I was 19, I was lifeguarding with the woman who said, I wish I would have fired you and I'm glad you didn't leave. She's like, you have the greatest skill to talk to people. Go. We have this event coming up. Go to the local businesses and see what you can get from them for our event for these teenage kids. And I ended up walking around the whole city or driving around the whole city. And I just came back with like a bucket full of like coupons. I even got a check for like $100, which back then was insane. Like, you know, like all these things. And she's like, this is what you're supposed to do. There's two times I've had that. One of my teachers, when I took a foreign language survey class, said, you have a very good like ability to intonate, like to be like sound like somebody who's from there. So you should study languages. And I was like, all right, I'll study languages then. And then the other one was she said to me, you're really good at this kind of sales. You should do that.
Yeah.
And so that kind of stuck with me.
You know, they say languages are like the path to culture and understanding people. Do you think like your ability to understand Portuguese, Mandarin, all these different languages helps you kind of be able to connect better with people? And maybe if you didn't learn all those languages, you wouldn't be as good at sales?
100%. I think, well, I mean, here's the funny thing.
Yeah.
Yes, first of all, I think that's true because it allows you to connect with somebody on a different culture in a different way, right? So I can speak Chinese idioms, which is the next level up from speaking Mandarin.
Yeah.
So like if I say 多行不义必自毙, it means like those who walk in the path of darkness will befall their own fate. It means if you do bad stuff, bad things are going to happen, right? Basically. But if I say that like in normal Chinese, you know, 做坏事你会得到坏的情况 or something like that, right? They'll be like, okay, I get that. But when you say that, they're like, you really understand us, you know? And that connection is deeper and people respect that more. So in the cross-cultural aspect of that, I think it works. I was really surprised, to be honest with you, about my success in the US. When I first started working for Valuetainment, I was like, I don't know if this is going to translate, that nobody needs me. Like there's a lot of MBA guys, like there's a lot of Yale grads, there's a lot of smart people out here. There's like gurus. And what I learned is like the same skills translate, you know. What I always try to do in my process is to have integrity and to be sincere. Yeah. So like if I tell you that I care about you, I will go that extra step to do that because I really mean it. Not just to get the sale.
Right.
Because I try to understand what you're trying to accomplish and what your pain points are so I can try to help you solve those because you're helping me solve mine.
Right.
And I think that's what's translated in that understanding, like, you know, above the transactional, you know, beyond the transactional, that's helped me.
So Valuetainment was the first time that you stepped into the U.S. market?
Yeah. When I landed, they're like, it's funny because, you know, it was a startup and we were just getting going and they're like, there was like one lead. I had to literally Google every company that sponsors podcasts. And I just went on LinkedIn and started adding people. And then I had to figure out tools to try to get to them. And then I'd get them on the phone and I didn't know what I was talking about. Yeah. I'm like, mid-roll, you know, pre-roll, end-roll. They're like, do you know what's your CPM? I'm like, I don't know what a CPM is. Like,
that's so funny.
Look it up.
Yeah.
So what was your job at Valuetainment?
I was doing the sponsorships for the podcast. And I actually ended up doing business development for like white labeling products. So we built like a drink, not like this one, Celsius, pay attention, that we white labeled that had a BHB ketone in it. And we built that business for Pat together with someone else. So that's kind of like where I took the next step beyond just doing transactional sponsorships to trying to build something of real value that we could own and that we could hold on to.
Man, so your capacity to communicate, would you say that's one of the greatest assets that you have?
I think in a certain way, yes, but I think honestly, it's just the sincerity because when we fail, if we do something and it doesn't work, I actually feel that pain for the other person too, and try to do what I can to solve for that issue. Like if I can get you an extra read, if I can, you know, like, I don't know if I should say this. If Pat, if you're watching, I'm sorry. I gave extra reads to Goldco so that we could make our quota. But yeah, those are the types of things that I would do. You know,
your capacity for sincerity. Yeah, to be sincere.
I would say, bro, you're really good at speaking and communicating. And as someone that is not my strong suit, maybe you take it for granted. But I think, yes, sincerity, 100% very, very important. But you're very good at communicating and connecting with someone that, you know, with pretty much anybody you talk to.
Because like in looking at him, perhaps communication is the cake, but sincerity is the key ingredient.
Yes. That
he's unpacking and articulating for us. So sincerity in a world of insincerity and question of integrity and motives.
Yeah.
What does sincerity mean to you?
You know, I think here's the best thing I've ever heard in this. Like when I got married, one of the guys I was working with, I was a co-owner of an MMA organization based out of Asia, and at my wedding, he said, the thing about Aaron that means the most to me is that when I look at him, I just see manic goodness.
Yeah.
I was just blown away. Like he's like in what he tries to do and the way he tries to deal with people. Like that's not something that you can teach. And like, and for me, that was the biggest compliment I've ever received. So like, I always go back to that. Do I have a lot of words? Yes, I probably don't have a very good vocabulary. Like, I probably use words wrong and I talk a lot and sometimes too fast. But like I think people see that I'm really trying to help them and to understand them. That's where I think that I have that's what integrity means to me. And also doing the right thing when nobody's looking. It's like, are you going to do what you said you were going to do, or are you just not? And again, like we had a little discussion. That's one of the things I love about Erick. Like I know what he says is going to get done. So that's why I connect with him that way.
I appreciate it, man. As you're talking about caring about people, there's this. We're very we complement each other very well. I think that's the best way to put it. I remember we were at 5990 studio for Valuetainment, and I'm working there with the guys, and I'm just like, go, go, go. And there's this lady that just walks in. Remember that?
Yeah.
You want to tell that story?
This is the difference between unreasonable hospitality and Erick Galera. This lady walks in and she's like, "Is this the Spine Institute?" Because I guess there was a spinal institute. And he goes, "Ma'am, this is a private residence or business. You need to leave, please." And she's like, "Oh, but I'm lost." She was like, "Hold it." And I'm like, "Erick, I got this." And I'm like, "Ma'am, listen, I think what you're looking for is down the street. Let me walk you over to the door." And meanwhile, Erick's just like roboting over there, like, "Ma'am, this is a private business and you can't be in here. You need to leave, please. Thank you." I mean, it was polite, but it was like, yeah.
No, certainly no. I've learned a lot from Aaron because at Valuetainment, my job was production. It was operations. It was managing the team. And as an entrepreneur, you need to develop the people skills to be able to sell.
Yeah.
I mean, you need that with your people as well, but it's a different kind of skill when it comes to sales and connecting in that way. So I've learned a ton from you, man.
Okay, let me ask you this. What do you think is the greatest thing that you picked up from Aaron in your time in proximity with him?
I think it's less about seeing things from my perspective and what I think is right and isn't right, and it's more understanding where you're coming from. Because in order for me to influence you, I need to, kind of put myself in your shoes and also let myself be influenced by you. And so I think Aaron is someone that when he speaks, he's always trying to find a way to help you in some way, connect. That way you're open. And so in the end, I think that is I guess the biggest lesson from my time with Aaron. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to be fair, one of the things I've gotten from Erick, which has been very helpful for me, is knowing where to draw the line in the sand and to say, like, this is as far as it goes. This is what I've agreed to do. This is what we can do. I can't go beyond that. And if, because I always want to compromise and help. And, and I've learned a lot of that from you, and it's been very helpful for me, actually. So I appreciate that.
Oh, that's great, man. I think, again, we complement each other very well. And me coming from the military background, I'm very rigid, very structured, professional and respectful. But, I set my foot down. But sometimes when you do that, and, most of the times when you do that, you aren't inviting people's cooperation. You know what I mean? And in that respect, I wasn't looking for her cooperation, so I was disinterested to, what she had to
just interested
say.
in her compliance.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
But
it was hilarious.
Yes. And then he pointed it out, and I thought it to I was like, yeah, you got a point, man. I gotta chill a little bit. But no, it's good, man. On
the opposite side of that, though, for what I do well is it leaves you open, because I'm a pretty emotional guy. The rebound response is kind of sometimes over the top too, because we've had some shouting. He doesn't shout. I've shouted at him, and it was uncalled for as well. So like there's you open yourself up to get a little bit more hurt. You're more likely to say something that you don't mean in the moment. And that's something that I've had to grow, over these times. Because, you talk about the whole premise of this show, what drives me? Well, What first drove me was I'm not going to be poor ever again. I'm not going to live in a trailer. I grew up in a trailer. I'm going to be smarter than my family. I'm going to be I was the first one to graduate college. I'm the only one with a master's degree. Like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to be something, right? And then you get to a certain point and you're like, well, this isn't what's driving me anymore. Then I got saved, you get saved, and that kind of says, well, okay, how do I do this for the glory of God? Well, I'm going to do this for the glory of God. But you're not doing anything without him leading you, guiding you, giving you the strength to do it, and allowing you to breathe.
Yeah.
So then you have to surrender that. And then the next iteration comes and you're like, okay, what am I going to do now? Like, what's the purpose of like my life and like the business that I have right now? I mean, it's Crown, we're kingdom focused, right? What does that mean? Like, it means like I have to take the resources that God gives me or the doors that he opens me for me and say, what do you want me to do in this situation, God? Like, dude, I get to text Tucker Carlson, like, even Matt Gates, all these, like, if this was 10 years ago, I'd be starstruck and I'd be out there, like, hey, I hang out with these guys. Hey, now it's like, okay, how do I demonstrate Christ's love to Matt and his family? How do I demonstrate love to Pat, to all these guys that I've dealt with? How do I be that? And then when these resources, as they start to grow, what do you want me to do with them, Lord? Because I mean, I've been blessed to have a very good life over the last couple of decades. I've, for the most part, haven't really had to suffer that much like I did when I was a kid.
Yes.
But I had a color coordinated like wardrobe in Beijing on the 33rd floor of a house, a building overlooking the whole city, and I felt empty. Yeah. So the money doesn't fill that. Like,
I'm curious. You're constantly giving and trying to help people. Does it ever discourage you when that person doesn't reciprocate, or they take it for granted, or they are just not grateful?
For the most part, I would say no, because the Bible tells us to give without expectation of receiving back. Yeah. I think the only times I really get disappointed is when I see that person not being able to, like, they're trying to do something and then they just turn their back on it and leave, and you try to give them the ability to get there, whether that's financial, whether that's your time or whatever. But I also know that it's not for me to make the change in them, that they have to make that change. I mean, my brother and I are from the same family. We're drastically different, and so are all the people that are around you. I mean, we're not a normal group of guys, right? Like, I mean, I picked up and moved from Florida to Texas to be with you and Kai and some of the other guys that work here because the mindset is different. Yeah. And I do believe God pushed me to come here, but there's a different grind and a different vision here.
Talk about that mindset and vision. What makes it distinct?
I know that the guys, because I've worked with everybody that's out here, like, and they've all been trying to improve either their lives or the lives of the people around them, and they don't stop. Like, it's weird because, I work with a lot of different people, and you'll see that what do they call the 459 Club? Is that what it's called?
459 as far as powerlifting?
No, the 459 where like guys are out the door at 4:59.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like there's a lot of, dude, I take phone calls till like 2:00 in the morning. Like, he's up editing until 3 in the morning.
That he is.
And it's like, if you're not really driven to do that, like, we only have like 70 years on this planet, like, and functionally like 50 of them, right? Like, so how much time do I have to like actually make a difference?
Well, talk to me about the difference that you want to make. Like, what is the fault or the wrong that you see in the world? And then what is the right that you hope to bring to it through your life?
Well, I mean, we obviously are in the middle of a spiritual battle of good and evil, I think, on a grander scale. I think on a micro scale, it's helping those people with the problems in their lives I do believe that if you ask for it, God will give it to you for the most part, as long as it's in his will. And part of that is like bringing the people into your world that he needs to say something to them through you, or you need to do something for there. Like we were talking about earlier, if nothing else happened from Valuetainment, which was a great working experience, like a great thing to have. But the best moment of my life there was when I was driving to church in the morning and God said, go call Vinny and tell him to come to church. And I watched him get saved. And I see the fruit of that now. He still talks about the Lord, and I could tell he's still moving towards that. Yeah. And that was what I was there for, if nothing else. The money, the resume builder, the growth, seeing if I could get my network moving in the U.S. It doesn't matter. What matters is that Vinny came to know Christ.
Now there's dozens and maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of guys listening, thinking if I just get X amount of money, I'm going to be good. I'm going to be happy, or I get this woman or this or that. For you, what is life about for you?
Yeah, well, I think it's about finding those moments. It's about, look, I mean, I had a friend in high school. 4 of my best friends from high school are dead. You know, like one of my best friends got ran off the road in a motorcycle. I was supposed to be with him that night and got killed from a bar. Another one got shot. My cousin stole a car running from the police and got run off he got smashed into a guardrail and then into the water. You know, I mean, you're not guaranteed tomorrow. And so I think whatever the purpose of our life is to glorify God and to love our neighbor and to love him, but doing that, like when something comes across your plate, you need to be there to be for that moment. And God will, if your heart's open, he's going to put you there. You know, he's going to put you in those situations. I see it. I don't want to give out like too much detail because I have people that you would think like, I don't really have a relationship with this person, but then they'll reach out to you and they need some help in some way, whatever it is. And you can do it. And you hear them weeping on the phone at the other ends, you know, and then the next week they're like, dude, I decided to go back to church. That's what it's about. What it's about is like watching Erick start out, you know, and being able to like call Andrew Bustamante and talk to him and watch that relationship grow, because he supported me as a friend, you know, in those moments, but to be able to watch us both grow together. And I know that he's, you know, he loves the Lord too. And he's trying to grow, he's growing his faith and he's growing his, you know, it's not only going to just be so that he can buy a big house. You know, I know he wants to take care of people. And so when you find like-minded people like that and you can grow together, like there's nothing that can stop that, you know? So
what life is about for you is, what I'm hearing you say is ultimately glorifying God. And by that, maximizing the moments that you've been given.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm like, it's funny because some guy called me the Forrest Gump of sponsorship. It's like, I'm the Forrest Gump.
I'll take that as a compliment.
Well, I called myself an idiot with a laptop and he's like, I would go with maybe the Forrest Gump of sponsorship.
There's more color there.
Yeah. I like that because at the end of the day, you know, at one point I brought the UFC into China when I was 31. I think I was 31. I had a corner office on the 33rd floor of a building for IMG. I was 29. Like I had everything. Like I was backslidden from the Lord for a while. I had girls, I had money, I had everything I wanted. I could do anything. If I wanted to go somewhere, I could go. If I wanted to do something, I could do it. And I would throw all that away for the worst moment I had, I think in the last like 20 years of my life was in COVID. I had resigned from my job and I had moved to Brazil with my wife to be with her mother. Her mother had cancer. And I should have just kept the job and went, but for some reason I just couldn't. I just felt like, and I think God was pushing me because he wanted me to go through it.
Yeah.
Like to the point where we got there and I haven't lived with anyone since I was like 26 years old or 27 years old. I had to live with their parents, or her parents. And I ended up like taking care of her mom for the last 3 years with my wife before she passed of cancer. We could have stayed in Thailand and I would have actually seamlessly transitioned into another job, like in the amount of time I needed. Right. But those 3 years, it was so hard. Like I was like,
in what way?
I didn't have any income, burned through my life savings.
Yes.
Just, I didn't have any hope because it's COVID, it's Brazil. Like I can't get a job even if I wanted one. I don't have any network in Brazil.
Yes.
And I was like, Lord, what are you doing? And I just kind of knew somewhere in the back of my mind that this was like my grinding period.
Who got you to VT? Was it Roy?
No, it was Donnie,
that's right.
Cappy.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's another thing. So I get like after about a year and a half, I finally get this job, and I'm like, okay, this is back in sports. I'm doing television, and even that was miserable. And then that job ended. And it was like, okay, what do I do now? Like, and then I was right before I had lost the position. I was looking at, I was watching Pat's content because he's one of the only guys that I learned early on actually understood China. I'm like, yeah, everything he's talking about is right. Why is nobody else picking this up?
What do you mean by understood China in contrast to what people think?
I think we're getting it now, but for the last 2 decades, they've been slowly infiltrating this company or this country.
Yeah.
You know, through media, through business, through spies. I mean, there was a 60 Minutes Australia that said that like 90% of the people who are students are spying and sending back information from, and that's something that nobody wanted to talk about.
Okay. I'm really curious about this in context of people in the US understanding China. I think more people are now, but what do you think that people in the US need to understand about China that the average person doesn't?
Yeah. Well, the average Chinese person hates you. Like they
And what do you mean by hate?
I mean, you have to understand from their perspective. We have
to frame it up.
We can rah about, oh, we're good, they're bad. Okay, look, there's a dispute with Taiwan and China. And if I'm a Chinese guy, I'm going to say, dude, that's a part of our thing. It's like, people who complain about Tibet, it's like, bro, they lost. Okay. Like you either have a revolution or shut up.
Right.
And by the way, for all the stuff you want to say about China, they built high-speed railways.
Sure.
They built like a bunch of stuff. Like
that's why I think we should have Canada.
Yeah, I think we should too. And Denmark. Or Greenland. We'll take Denmark too. But
sure, we all have our frame, which I think is what you're trying to say.
So what I'm saying is, and from our perspective, we're like, oh, they're trying to push this and that, but the average Chinese person is like, what they're taught is there were 8 countries that humiliated them, like in the last dynasty, right? Before the republic started. And foreign powers did, in fact, invade China, carve it up and do things to it for themselves. So like they got a chip on their shoulder. And I get that. Like, so they're like, well, we're going to show you economically, militarily, and, like intellectually, whatever way we can that we're better than you. Because they do have that concept anyway, that they're the smartest and the chosen
Does
kingdom.
the average person believe that they're better?
I think not. It's not like something that like they think about. I think it's like, subconsciously.
Yeah.
Like subconsciously they think, oh, I'm Chinese. We're 5,000 years of history. We have all this. We were like one of the first to, which they had a lot of accomplishments before America even was a thought, right? So I'll give them the credit in that, like to say that. I get that. But they're like a slow drip. Like they had this thing where they used to kill you called the 1,000 cuts, right? Where they do the little cuts. That's what they've been doing for the last 40 years, taking away our industry. I remember I ran into this guy in China. He used to work for he was a Navy engineer, like on one of like the higher level. And he's like, oh, I'm working for the China Maritime. And I'm like, you're a traitor, bro. Get out of my face. Like, but there were a lot of, because they would get paid like $250,000 to come over there and do that, as opposed to whatever you make in the military doing that job, and if I'm going to be on that side competitive, I get that. But for us as Americans, I think we need to say like, hey, these Confucian institutes are all basically spy networks, like they're building buildings next to our military bases and like renting. I mean, come on. Like, and Pat was saying that early on, and I was like, he's the only one who gets this because it's the big kid on the block and the up and comer, right? Yeah. So that's, and we stood by and watched them build islands in the South Pacific and nobody did anything,
So how do you take the UFC to China and not have to at some point have to work with them? You know what I mean?
So again, I went to China because of martial arts the first time, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this is like where martial arts come from. This is a natural bridge. And, I knew the Chinese fighters because I had met some of the local promotion guys. They weren't at the level, but I was like, I know that they can get there. If they taste any success, they're going to see it.
Right.
So I went, it was funny because I was at this event in a television event in Shanghai, and I ran into this guy and he's like, I work for the UFC. I'm like, I'm going to bring you into China. And he's like, what? So I walked him over to one of the stations, closed the deal for him in Mandarin. And then the next couple months, about a month later, I got an email saying, hey, can you fly to Vegas and come and meet everybody? So I put together this presentation and I'm excited. I fly over to Vegas. I'm thinking, I'm going to meet Lorenzo Fertitta, the owner, and this guy, Jamie, and maybe this guy, Marshall. I walk in, there's like 15 people in this meeting. Like Lorenzo, Dana pops in for a minute. Like all these.
You're thinking you're going to meet a couple guys.
Yeah. And my computer dies right at the beginning. So I have to it blue screens. So I have to reboot it. Anyway, I just put it down while I was rebooting. I just went into my spiel.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is the biggest untapped market you have. Like, this is going to be a monster. Like, you have to invest. You're not going to get any money because the NFL, everybody was giving away their TV rights for years without getting paid. There's like a famous story in Chinese media. Oh, David Stern from the NBA stood outside of the gate in the snow for 2 hours to give the NBA finals to the president of CCTV5. And that's how foreigners should treat our market because we're such a big market. It's like, okay, buddy, just calm down. But I knew this was different. Yeah. And then I started working with some of the online portals, and one of them put out a story about like Ben Saunders, who was like a fighter back then, but he had Jeet Kune Do was his background. So they tied that to Bruce Lee, and it hit 2 million hits in like an hour.
Wow.
And so they called me and they're like, hey, we want to broadcast this.
Yeah.
And then I ended up taking 10 people from China to a UFC event, like for a whole week, spent the whole week with them there, walked them through the tough, they were filming Tough at the time. We were there. I took them to fights. It was a magical time. And so I signed all of the online contracts, all of the television broadcast contracts, and the first fighter agreements. So at that time, WEC was still a thing, but UFC owned them. So we sent this kid, Zhang Tietren, to fight there. And he won his first couple fights. And the next thing you know, like everybody's getting interested.
Momentum.
Yeah. And then I ended up leaving to go to this local promotion in Asia, which was going to get sold to the UFC. And then I was going to cash out and go back to the UFC, but then it didn't happen, right? But now there's like there's a sports PI. There's tons of fighters in China. Zhang Weili is champion right now, I think. And it's funny because like there's the best Chinese male fighters. There's two, Song Yadong and Li Jingliang. Li Jingliang, they call him the Leech. And I gave him that name because his mouth was so big. I was like, dude, you're like a leech. And everybody's like, oh, his jiu-jitsu so good. He's like a leech. I'm like, that's not how he got his nickname. He's got a big circular mouth.
That's funny.
But yeah, so like that was like, and it's funny because I met Dana like last year with Pat.
Yeah.
And Dana remembered me because I hadn't talked to Dana since I left. And that was like 12, 13 years ago.
Yeah. Did you meet Dana at that meeting?
Yeah, he was. I met him a bunch of times because I actually translated for him a couple times. So yeah, it was crazy, man.
So to get that deal to go through, you never did anything like this prior to bringing UFC to China, correct?
Well, I work with the NFL, but we already had an agency that had already started that process. So actually it was good because it was a blueprint for me to know what to do. Sorry, I'm spitting everywhere. But no, it was a blueprint for me to know what to do. And so I was like, okay, we're going to build a grassroots program. This is the TV program we're going to do. And they ended up following most of it.
Interesting.
Yeah, I still think that they owe me about 10 million because they sold for $4 billion. Dana, if you're out there, can I get a check, please?
That's funny. So back to the spy thing. So you're bringing UFC to China. You didn't have to deal with any government stuff?
That was early on. Then that went away, and then it was nothing but commercial for like the next 5-6 years. So I never ran into any other problems because they knew that I was like I'm not going to do anything.
Can you talk about the big interview you almost put together?
No, I can't talk about that yet because it's still in progress. So, and I don't know if it's going to happen if we air this, but but I don't care at this point. I'll release that at another date that you can put it out there.
There we go.
How about that?
This guy's going to get together a massive name. And if he says that, you're going to be like, what the hell?
It'll be the biggest interview in journalistic history, I think.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping it works.
So I'm so curious about that part about you, bro, because you can literally get anybody's number. And not just get their number, but get them to talk to you. And not just to get them to talk to you, but get them to actually want to do business with you.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
I just make a joke, usually. They're like, how'd you get this number? I'm like, I'm a ninja. And they're like, dude, that's stupid. And I'm like, I know it's stupid. I'm dumb. I'm fat. Like, let's talk, I think that, it's 90, I would say it's probably 70-30. 70% they'll, and then once in a while, like the fake Ed Milet will respond with something. Right. Until here.
So what's the craziest story of somebody you reached out to and you ended up doing business with?
The fake Ed Milet.
So I reached out. I have a guy that helps me find phone numbers too. And I thought I had Ed Milet's phone number and I sent him this big long message and he's like, suck my D. And I'm like, well, that's an answer. Do you want to work with me or not? I pivot like that, right? Like I'll take what you give me and I'll just
and dance with it.
I'll Tai Chi it to you, right? The biggest one, I don't know. I think honestly, it's Pat, to be honest, because I didn't even reach out. I reached out to Donnie. I looked at Donnie's profile. He came back. We started talking. And then I ended up, the next thing I know, I'm on a phone call with Pat. And the best part about that one was I texted Pat the night before because I got his phone number. And I'm like, hey, I'm your 4:00 tomorrow. I just wanted to let you know I did this, and this as preparation. And then the next day he responds. And he's like, I'm looking forward, can't wait for tomorrow. I'm like, it's in 4 hours and I'm counting every minute. And he goes, I love it. And then I had the greatest interview with him.
That's awesome. Because, for context, I was there 2 years before and Adam Sosnick was handling sponsorships and he hated it. And he wanted to give it to me and I hated it. And I didn't realize how much money was in sponsorships until you took it.
Yeah.
There were salespeople and you know them. I mean, they were making tons of money with the consulting, the business consulting. and they weren't really interested in sponsorships, and you were competing with them in revenue. And
well, I would have beat them if Pat would have taken the money. My biggest problem was Pat didn't want to take it, right?
Yeah. He was picky with whoever he took.
This is why I like Matt Gaetz so much, man. That guy will he's like, yeah, we'll do that. Like, I'm like, yes.
Yeah, no, it's crazy.
We're all going to be rich.
We haven't started the podcast. We already have so many contracts locked in.
We have almost committed right now what Pat had with what he accepted, which was a good number.
Yeah.
I think this one's going to be massive. Like, I'm excited about it.
And so I'm also curious, dude, because, okay, so you come to Valuetainment, you work with Pat, you're working really closely with him. And then you start working with this billionaire that wants to do a drink, and you help broker the deal. It's like, and you, prior to coming to Valuetainment, felt like you couldn't really make it in the U.S. market. And here you are talking to a billionaire, trying to connect them with Pat, and you make the drink happen.
Yeah.
How does that work?
The ketone drink?
Yes. I mean, honestly, like it's inspiration from God. It must be, because I would have never. So this guy chased me and his guys were chasing me about sponsoring like the podcast with the powder that they had. And Pat's like, nah, I don't want that. And then even worse, like the only time he invites me into the podcast room while they're filming, he's like, yeah, these guys keep trying to sponsor us like this ketone thing. And he's like, I hate that stuff. And I'm like, oh, Pat, shut up. Don't poop on my potential sponsor. Because these guys offered a good amount of money, right? So and I get a text from the guy, the owner. He goes, I saw the podcast. I love it that he crapped all over our stuff. I'm like, is something wrong with you? So then he goes, well, what can we do? And I just start thinking. And at that time, we're trying to promote our hats, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, you're in Walmart and Target, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you get our hats into Walmart and Target? Yes. Okay, I'm going to get you a meeting with Pat. So I got him a 15-minute meeting with Pat based on getting hats into Walmart.
Wow.
He comes up. That meeting turns into like an hour because they're from the same place. They start talking about stuff. And then the next thing I know, I'm walking Rob, the guy, out, and he grabs my arm and he's like, what do I need to do to make this happen? And I go, ready to drink, carbonated, no sugar, no caffeine. And that's the last time.
That's quite the formula.
Yeah. And I'm like, that's the last time I think I'm going to hear from him. 2 months later, I get a call. I've got a prototype ready. I'm going to fly all you guys to Dallas to do a try. And we're going to see if we can make it happen. I'm like, what?
Did you expect to hear back?
No, not at all. Nobody ever, most of the time, that kind of stuff just fades off into nowhere. So the next thing I know, I've got a contract for Pat for ownership of this drink. We're all on a private plane to Dallas that they flew out to come pick us up on. We're all taste testing like these energy drinks with our comedian, which is like the biggest mistake you can ever. Vinny did like a 4-hour stand up. It was amazing. But
That's funny.
So then we came up with this drink, and then it's going through iterations now. But like I just couldn't believe it was real.
Yeah.
Again, like I'm getting on a private.
It went to market, didn't it?
Yeah. It's still out.
Yeah.
So
that's crazy. And then I remember. Fast forward, we leave Valuetainment, you start Crown Sponsor, I start Galera Media. And the beautiful thing about us is, I handle production, you do sponsorships, we work independent, but we collaborate a lot, right? And I get this phone call from Aaron. He goes, pack your shit, we're going to Puerto Rico. He goes, I met this billionaire, we're going to help him with his podcast. And I'm like, I'm packing, dude, I'll be there. And we go to Puerto Rico, and he introduced, he's like, we're going to work with Jake Paul, we're going to work with Sugar Shane Mosley. How did that happen?
Yeah, so and it's funny because this is again like there's a group called American Financing, guys. AmericanFinancing.net. Get a lower interest rate and pay off your credit cards there. Ryan, I did the shout out. Okay, so I'm talking to Ryan. This is 2 weeks before I leave Valuetainment, and they want to sponsor it. I'm like, yeah, it's not going to happen, right? Yeah. So I keep in touch with the guy afterwards, and he and I kind of hit it off. And then he starts telling me about all this stuff, and then this is the most amazing. This is like. Candace Owens left the Daily Wire, right? And so everybody's looking for her, and I found her. And so I call and I get them hooked up with the Daily Wire or with Candace directly. And then the next thing I know, they've done a deal, which is a big deal. And and then they're like, hey, we like you, we're about to start. I'm like, hey, well, I know a guy who can help you. Like so we all get flown down to Puerto Rico, and then we're all sitting on a beach for 3 days having these discussions, and the relationship's still there. It's been amazing. And like, I think there's there's something will come of that as well. But like something big will come of that as well. Like it's just those moments are like, it's just nuts.
Dude, that's so funny. Cause I remember when Candace left, I called Aaron and I'm like, dude, get that number. If you get that number right now, I bet we can do something. And he did. So I'm curious, Like, did she respond? Was it her people? What happened with that?
So it's so funny. There's another funny thing, another God moment. So I reach out and I end up meeting the agency that's working with her. And so we call, that's where we do the deal.
Yeah.
Then I go to a Turning Point USA event and I'm in the back on the VIP list for some, like I get sneaked back in there by the Turning Point people. And then they're like, oh, you can get a picture with Candace. And so I just shot my shot with Candace while I'm there. I'm like, hey, you don't remember me, but we met at Valuetainment. She's like, oh yeah, I do. I'm like, by the way, I left. And by the way, I just did a deal with your agency, and I got you a sponsor and I really want to work with you.
Yeah.
And she's like, call my husband. And then I just started talking to her husband. And the funniest part, one of the only wow moments I've ever had as a celebrity, I'm on a conference call with one of her teammates. And you know how they blur out the back so you can only see her? Next thing I know, Candace's head pops into the interview. And she's like, hey, Aaron, how you doing? And I was like starstruck. I was like, and so it's been like this cool, direct connection. And then the next thing I know, I get a call from Tucker's people and they're like, hey, we heard about you. We want to talk to you about a few things. And the next thing I know, I'm doing deals for, trying to do deals for Tucker, not as his staff, but working with him in-house as an agency, just having that relationship. It's been amazing.
Now, business is ups and downs.
Yeah.
And we've both experienced that, right? What is some advice you could give somebody that's maybe getting started that maybe, you get the rush and the adrenaline of a massive deal and then there's months, nothing happens.
Yeah.
Because we've both been through it. So what would be some advice you could give when it comes to that?
Well, or worse, the rug gets pulled out from underneath you from somebody. And when you work in the agency industry, it's pretty cutthroat. So even if you work a job, honestly, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Right. You never know how things are going to go. But as an entrepreneur, if you have faith, then you just know, I wake up every morning at 3 or 4 in the morning and I kind of have this anxiety and I'm like, and then I just say this anxiety is not real. God is on the throne. Everything's already written. I know it's going to work out in the end. I'm just walk through it the best I can. And then then he tells me something else to pray for, or I think about something else to pray for and I pray for it. And then I go to sleep and I wake up at 7.
But you always make phone calls, right? So you're putting in the work too. Yeah.
So then the next step is it's not, luck is a huge thing too. But if you're consistently, grinding and making calls and putting it out there, eventually something's going to catch.
Right.
And then that catches something else and then something else catches from there. So I think that's kind of one of the most important things is you just got to keep going. I mean, you
think that's the biggest thing people get wrong? They stop? They quit too soon?
I think that's part of it. But I also think that sometimes you pick the wrong thing. If you're not somebody else told me this, you have to be stupid enough not to quit. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of it, for me, it's been a lot smoother than probably for most entrepreneurs because I already had people coming to me before I left Valuetainment. Yeah. So I kind of already had an existing thing going. I've lost some of those clients and I've lost some of those deals, but because of those deals, other deals have come. So it's been a little bit easier, but I've also had some real hard losses where people have taken things from me and it wasn't right. And I think you just got to keep going and you just got to grind it out. And you'll know, maybe that door closes, but another one opens. I never thought I would go into politics. I never had any interest in it, right? To deal with political stuff. I'm too afraid, you know?
Yeah. Well, if the thing is keep going, I think we all have a reason. We have to have an empowering reason to keep going. So for you, what is that reason? What keeps you going when it would be easier to quit at times?
Again, I'm like the Forrest Gump of the sponsorship industry. I just go where God opens the door, and usually it falls in line with because I lean on that. My passion usually aligns with that. You talk about Matt, where Matt's going to go in the next few years. Matt Gates, he was a rock star at AmFest. He has keys to areas that I think, and a voice that other people don't have. And I think that if God can use me in that slipstream, as I'm following along, I think it's going to be something amazing that he's going to do. Same thing with being able to talk to Tucker. Same thing with being able to talk to Candace's husband. And, it's about supporting them too, by the way. Yeah. I prayed with Matt. I pray for Tucker. I send texts back and forth. I've prayed with George, Candace's husband. That's, they're out there in the front getting their butts kicked all the time.
We go to the Mike Tyson Jake Paul fight. I see this guy praying over George Jenko.
Yeah.
George Jenko was like Logan Paul's co-host, and now he's got his own big podcast now.
Yeah.
It's like this guy, but you genuinely care for people, man. And I think that is probably your biggest superpower. But I'm curious too, because like you, I didn't grow up with money. I grew up very poor, and I didn't have a great relationship with my father.
Yeah.
Does that do something to you today? Does that drive you in any way?
You know, I think a lot of that has gone away. I mean, I even because we look, I don't know if you're like this, but I looked for stronger male figures to like kind of replace that, which is why I worked for Pat, why, I am so excited to work for Tucker, these guys. And I think honestly, recently in like the last few months, God's kind of like showed me that that's an idol.
Yeah.
Like that's something like he's the only person you should be living and working for. Like, and you've said this to me too, because I know you've been on your journey too. Like, God's going to take care of the financial aspects of it. Like it's going to work itself out regardless. So like, why worry about it? And I think that that's much less to me, although there are moments where I have it. We're all humans, right? Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, dude, like, and excuse my language, but my mission statement for my company is do dope shit with people I love and spread the gospel through it.
Love it.
Because there's, and that's another reason why I like Matt. He actually said this to me the other day. He's like, I want to do cool stuff with people I like. Yeah. And I like you. And I'm like, well, good. I want to be there for you and support you. I want to do cool shit with you. And like, let's see what happens. And like, I think, dude, and that's why I work with you. That's why I work with Kai. That's why I work with Roy. Yeah. Because we help each other. We all grow and we all can benefit from it.
That's super interesting, dude. Yeah. For me, we talked about this in a different episode. The fear of being poor again always plays in the background. And I have to constantly, we talked about this, you and I, all the time. And I'm like, what if I lose this? And then the impact that can have. And I'm always thinking about, being poor again. And that is probably my biggest fear. Like, I'm not afraid of a lot of things. I was in the Marine Corps. I was told I was going to deploy and go to Iraq, and I was excited. And, but if you told me, you might go, be poor again, that plays with my psyche just because it really did a number on me growing up. So I think you can use that to drive you, but you have to be pursuing something a lot more meaningful than just, not wanting to be poor or to overcompensate the other way, right? There's got to be a bigger purpose. So speaking of that bigger purpose, you and I are choosing media. What is it about media that, you could be selling anything else, but you're in the media space. What is it about it that interests you?
Well, one thing I want to touch before we move on to that, it's my CFO, William, who I used to have this conversation with him. Hey, I don't know. I don't want to go back to work. I don't want to work at Starbucks. Da, da, da. And he's like, Aaron, you speak 5 languages. You married a beauty queen. You literally have so much experience in all of these things. You really think that you're going to like go back to working at Starbucks? And even if you did, God would give you peace about it. But like, that we're not those people anymore. Right. We're not those kids that are like not skilled, right? Mm-hmm. Like we have skills, we have circles, and we have. Who was the guy who said you're worth as much as your Rolodex? Was that Matt? Yeah. Was that Matt Sapala? But you like how I'm doing these one-on drop?
I love it. Break the third wall.
Yeah, I am going to break it. But back to media, why we do media, it's the most impactful place you can be, man. Look at what it's done look at Mark Zuckerberg on Rogan this week. Yeah. Like, look at the influence that's had over the last decade and like over our entire lives. We just didn't know it, right? Right. Where can we make the most impact? Those are the circles that can do it. And I think that's why we're there.
That's awesome. I agree with that too. So any final thoughts, man? I think it's interesting to get to hear your story, to see kind of where you came from, where you are now, where you headed. Do you have any final thoughts for people watching, or you?
I do have a question in context of the end of your life. How would you define if you lived a successful life? How would you articulate her?
I'm glad you asked me that. I think if somebody said the same thing at my eulogy that the guy said that Mike Haskamp said at my wedding, I would feel like I actually accomplished something. That he lived a life for Christ with manic goodness as part of it. That would make me think that our righteousness is filthy rags, obviously, and we're dependent upon Christ's sacrifice and covering for our salvation. So when we get to the gates, that's the only way that we're going to cross the threshold. But if he could use me in that way to where people would say that would be a successful.
Your faith is clearly an anchor for you. What would you say to someone who's like, okay, I've been hurt by church. I've had all these things happen to me. I don't know what a relationship with God looks like. How do I start?
Yeah. Christians suck sometimes. I mean, they really do. Like even me, I was lost. I've hurt a lot of people in my life, like even while I was a Christian, but I think that the message is not the messenger. And I think if you sincerely seek what the truth is and you look for that, he's going to find it. So before I got saved, this is funny. I was I was homeless and I was in my car, and it was like in the middle of winter, and this is Washington, so it wasn't like that bad, but like, I was just like, cause my dad's church was like all like legalism and like, we're one of the 144,000. I think they even had the 144,000. And I said, if you're real God, why don't you just show up? And then a couple of weeks later, I went to that. I met that lady, and then I went to that camp, and here we are. I mean, I'd be dead or in prison probably if I wasn't saved, and that's not without me making a lot of mistakes and being hurt by the church or being hurt by people or hurting other people. So you have to learn to like surrender that and find people who, have that heart that you can genuinely get to know. And I'll tell you, if they do believe in Christ, God will work through them to help you heal those wounds and to help you understand we go to Milestone Church here, and it's probably one of the most loving churches I've ever been to. Like I usually wait and see where I can go. And as soon as we were there the first day, I was like, this is where we're supposed to be. So shout out to Milestone Church. But no, it's you just have to understand that the messenger is flawed, but the message is perfect, and you have to seek it. If you seek it, God will come find you.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautifully said.
I couldn't have said it better, man. So just in summary, faith, what else?
Just grinding it out. I mean, you got to find,
Okay.
You talked about your why too. Like find your why. Like if, when I when I did Kung Fu, I asked my Kung Fu instructor when I went back to school, I don't like school. What should I study? He goes, study what you like. And then everything else will kind of fall in line. I would say this, like, if you want to be an artist and you think you're going to be a professional artist, get a degree in engineering so you can have something to fall back on or something like that, maybe. But if you really feel that way, if you drive hard enough, you'll get there.
Yeah.
Like sales is easy for, like it's very transactional in a lot of ways. Like it's easier. Like if I have this and you have that and you want this, we change, right? But if you want to build, like I'm building a business, I have no idea what I'm doing. I was terrified.
Yeah.
I was terrified to leave Valuetainment. I never wanted to be an entrepreneur. I always wanted to be number 2 or number 3 in a company, an entrepreneur. Right? But I love it now. Yeah. Like I don't know if I could ever go back.
No.
I love the fact that and I don't know how to lead people. I mean, I've got 2 guys that work for me and I'm just like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just trying to do to be fair and to do the things that I didn't like happen to me. I stay away from those and try to do the things that did motivate me to do those.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, that's awesome. And then I think a big thing for business and in general in life is, lead with value. And that's one thing that really stands out with what you do. Yeah. You're always trying to help somebody. So, dude, I appreciate you coming to the podcast, sharing your story. I look forward to working with you in 2025, taking, your agency to the next level, taking Galera Media to the next level as well in the podcast. And you'll be a reoccurring guest for sure, man.
Appreciate that.
Yeah. I'm leaving this conversation encouraged, with my head lifted and more inspired to attack. So thank you.
Praise God for that. Yeah. So I'm glad.
All right, guys. Peace out. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to watch another episode or click here to watch a clip from the podcast.